The Israeli military issuing a rare announcement. Their forces have discovered, quote, a number of bodies in the Gaza Strip. Moments ago, President Biden acknowledged the discovery to reporters. Now, this news has prompted the Hostages and Missing Families Forum in Israel to call for the public to mobilize to pressure the Netanyahu government to reach an agreement on a hostage and ceasefire deal. There are currently 107 total hostages, living and dead, still being held in Gaza. That is according to Israel and the Hostage Forum. CNN international diplomatic editor Nick Robertson is in Jerusalem. And Nick, it's been several hours now since the IDF put out what you've categorized and explained as a very rare statement. What more are you learning?
Yeah, at the moment, we're really waiting for the IDF to put forward more information. The identification process, which is what they say is underway at the moment, the retrieval and identification process of these bodies that they've discovered during combat operations, which a few hours ago was still ongoing, and that was the environment in which they were retrieving the bodies and then be able to go through the process of identification, is something that Israel has become all too painfully familiar with, a process of trying to find out about, generally speaking, about hostages, whether or not they've found bodies of hostages, and if so, who those hostages may be. This is a process that Israel has a huge amount of expertise in. So in the context of what we're hearing tonight, the fact that Israel is saying that it has discovered these bodies in of itself is unusual for them to say that during combat operations. So it's raised that level of expectation, particularly with the hostage families and all across the country, quite frankly. And this evening there were protests on the streets of Tel Aviv and in other cities in Israel, where many of the families of hostages and their friends and supporters were coming out quite simply to demand that Prime Minister Netanyahu does the deal to bring the hostages back, trying to put increasing amounts of pressure on him at the same time as talks are slowly going on, step by very painful step in the background. But at the moment, everyone here is waiting for that next piece of information to come from the IDF, who will at this time very likely have a good accounting for what they know and what they don't know.
Yeah, such a heaviness as everyone waits for that information. All right, Nick Robertson for us in Jerusalem. Thank you very much for that. And we have two Middle East experts to discuss this further. CNN political and national security analyst David Sanger, and a national security correspondent for the New York Times. He also wrote the book New Cold Wars, China's Rise, Russia's Invasion, and America's Struggle to Defend the West. Also with us, Aaron David Miller, a longtime State Department Middle East negotiator who's now a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Great to have both of you here with us. Aaron, I want to start first with you because your background is in hostage negotiation. We don't know. All we know are these bodies were found. The IDF has not categorized who they are. They're clearly, obviously trying to identify them now. But they did take this step, this rare step of putting out this statement, asking people to refrain from rumors and spreading rumors. What does it say to you that the IDF is making this move?
Jill, thanks for having me, Jessica. Look, I think it's no secret that there's a growing divide between the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and senior members of the Israeli Defense Forces. Last week, there was a virtual shouting match between Minister of Defense Gallant and the Prime Minister over the absence of urgency and the lack of strategy on the part of the current Israeli government, led by the Prime Minister, both for freeing the hostages, cutting a deal in an effort, perhaps, to de-escalate the war. IDF has a stake in transferring their military resources to what they believe is the graver threat in the northern border, and the IDF has a long-standing mission to redeem those on the battlefield, those who are alive and those who are dead. And while it's understandable to prosecute a war against Hamas and prevent another repetition of October 7, the IDF understands, the people of Israel understand, many Israeli politicians understand, that the redemption of the living is critically important. And time may be on Netanyahu's side, as well as Yahya Sinwar the head of Hamas, but is certainly, as today's events seem to suggest, not on the side of the hostages and their families.
And David, as Aaron's alluding to there, this drives so much at the heart of what's happening domestically in Israel as well, this push and pull between how the prime minister is proceeding and what especially these families of the hostages are pushing for. We see these massive protests, not just with families, but with everyday Israelis going into Tel Aviv to protest. And now these families, some families of the hostages calling on Israelis to mobilize in light of this news. Help people understand kind of all the dynamics at play here as we await more information.
Well, it's complicated, as Aaron just suggested. The core problem here right now is that for Prime Minister Netanyahu, there is almost every political advantage in dragging out these negotiations, raising new issues. And the same thing for Sinwar, the head of Hamas. And this is why you have seen so many repeats of the president coming out, as in that tape that you just saw from an hour or so ago, in which he says, we're right on the edge of things. And it was mid-July that Secretary of State Blinken told us we're inside the 10-yard line here. The reason they can't get this over the goal is that whenever you come right up to the agreement, it's to the advantage of both leaders to try to push this off. I think tomorrow you're going to probably see very significant demonstrations. We've seen them before, because frankly, the tyranny of the numbers here is pretty big. There were 250 hostages taken, roughly. About 100 got released. About 8 have been rescued. And that leaves, a good number, over 100 unaccounted for. We think probably a third of those have probably died. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of those are in this group that has been identified by the IDF.
And Aaron, I don't want to gloss over just the hell that these families have gone through in almost a year now that their loved ones have been gone, and what it must feel like right now just knowing there's a big question mark over all of this. But knowing that, and I am curious how you think this development might affect the ceasefire talks, the hostage the negotiations over getting a deal done.
It's hard to say, Jessica. Again, you saw in judicial reform for 42 weeks in a row, hundreds of thousands of Israelis out in the streets defending what they believe to be the kind of society that they want, the kind of Israel that they want. But the sad and cruel and politically inconvenient reality is you only need 60+1 to stay in power in the Israeli Knesset. And Mr. Netanyahu has a very tight-knit, coherent coalition of 64. And it's stunning to me, frankly, even by his determination. He wants to stay in power more than any other politician wants to have power. But here is a man who presided over the bloodiest day for Jews since the liberation of the Nazi death camps, the greatest intelligence failure in Israel's history, and has identified total victory. Total victory, even he knows, is an unrealizable goal. So I'm afraid that unless you saw a crack within that coalition, or the kinds of protests, literally 24/7, just to, in essence, shut down the country, which I don't think most Israelis are willing to do, this is going to drag on. And as David pointed out, when negotiations close, they close because there is urgency. Both parties believe that an agreement is better off for them than no agreement at all. And I'm sad to say, neither Sinwar nor Netanyahu, I'm hesitant to compare them, but when it comes to time, they are in effect on the same wavelength, sadly and cruelly.
And David, I saw you nodding your head there a little bit.
Yeah. It's a remarkable situation. I mean, listen to what you heard the president say when he was asked about the negotiations. He just keeps repeating, it's time for this war to end. It's time for this war to end. His critics argue, and I think there's some validity to that he has more leverage to make the war end than he gives himself credit for. And of course, there's a long time and traditional supporter of Israel and Israel's very important right to self-defense. He doesn't want to threaten to cut off weapons or do anything else that would force Netanyahu's hand. But clearly, that's the internal debate that's underway. And you could even see Vice President Harris walking that fine line in the CNN interview the other day.
Yeah, it will be fascinating to see how this plays out. And again, as we wait to hear more information about our breaking news tonight, which is that the IDF has said that it has found what it has categorized as a number of bodies, and that they are working to identify those. David Sanger and Aaron David Miller, thank you so much for your context here. We appreciate it.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jessica.